Chapter 41. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So, he's playing Xiangyu now, right? Why the hibiscus trees as rewards? Xiangyu doesn't seem to have anything to do with hibiscus trees. It makes more sense if the hibiscus tree was a reward for playing the first emperor. In Fate, the first emperor came into contact with the Fusang tree and analyzed it to find a way to become immortal and ascend to heaven, eventually creating an artificial immortal. Even though he's playing Xiangyu, the reward doesn't include a Fusang tree. There are two rewards: the Kuiji Type 0 design blueprint and the future prediction skill. The Fusang tree was a reward from the previous role-playing gig, the first emperor. So, is there a continuity problem here? The first emperor and Xiangyu were contemporaries. Historically, the first emperor lived from 259 BC to 210 BC. Xiangyu's life was recorded from 232 BC to 202 BC. They coexisted for over 20 years. What's up with that? Could it be that in this world's history, they didn't actually live at the same time? That their lifespans didn't overlap? That Xiangyu didn't exist until after the first emperor died? No, they're actually from the same batch of characters. The explanation is that he's controlling dual characters this time. Before the first emperor role ended, the system gave him a second one. He's essentially controlling two bodies at once, doing two things at once, a real challenge. As the first emperor, he gained full power soon after officially inheriting the throne. He could have launched conquests against Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yan, and Qi earlier. Instead of waiting until 230 BC, he figured he could have wrapped it up faster than a decade. The only reason he didn't was the fear of screwing up the role-playing progress bar, but he didn't think doing it earlier would actually cause the progress bar to regress. He was sticking to history to buy time. The reason he needed to stall was that he accidentally found the entrance to the fairy world and got a hibiscus tree as a reward. Then, he created seeds of the world tree, used the fairy world as fertilizer to accelerate growth, and a brand new space was born, a space untouchable by the Akashic records of this universe. The birth of a new universe. Basically, this newborn universe was tiny, with just one sun and one earth, but this new earth was similar to the main universe's earth. It had all the same animals, but no humans. These changes happened because he made adjustments through his Akashic records. The relationship between the two universes is like that of microorganisms living on a human body. People know microorganisms exist on them, but can't pinpoint specific new ones immediately, and probably won't notice them unless they cause a big enough disturbance. So, with this near-parallel Earth, he stalled for time. He followed the example of gods moving in the past, using war as cover for a quiet relocation, moving humans on a large scale. But if all the gods in the fairy world have run away, did he still need to be so secretive? Definitely. The fairy world gods were gone, but not gods from other mythologies. He had to watch out for those gods noticing something was up. The gods of the fairy world had their end times during the Yin and Shang dynasties, and that alerted other pantheons, but the outside gods who intervened were brutally killed by the fairy world gods. Any god who crossed the boundary was turned to dust. No mercy. That scared the gods from other mythological systems. Since that warning, they hadn't set foot in the human realm under the fairy world's jurisdiction. So, are those other gods still honoring that agreement? Is anyone sneaking across the border? That's what Baiyu was worried about. Everything was fine until all 6 countries were part of the Qin state, and about 3 million people had been relocated. After unifying the 6 kingdoms and formally establishing the Qin dynasty, he just reached the percentage value of the second reward. The second reward was similar to Solomon's reward for developing magic. It allowed him to understand how to develop electronic technology through magic. So, after developing some things based on the magic of immortality, he sped up to Qin's Industrial Revolution and started heading towards the machine age. Of course, he didn't want this universe's great Qin to actually enter the industrial age. That wouldn't work, and it would alert other myths. He'd do it in his own little parallel world, but the productivity of the small parallel world was much lower to start, so he developed things here first, then gradually transferred them to the other world. Then, the Qin dynasty's fall was orchestrated by the identity he controlled, Xiangyu. On the surface, it was to overthrow the Qin dynasty, but actually, it was cleaning up traces that shouldn't exist in this era. Basically, from the Qin dynasty's birth to its destruction, Baiyu's biggest worry was gods from other myths entering the world. He could handle 1 or 2. As soon as they stepped into Xianyang, he wouldn't give them a chance. He'd immediately have the branches of the world and the small parallel world come through, pull them over, and swallow them for nourishment, but too many would be a problem. If too many gods disappeared inexplicably, others might get suspicious. If they couldn't find them, they might use the Akashic records to search, so, the Akashic records of this world were still his biggest headache. Could he ask the 72 demon god pillars for help? He decided against it to avoid complications, plus, he didn't want the 72 demon god pillars, or even Belial, to know some of his secrets, didn't want this secret to be exposed. If he slipped up, human history might be closely monitored from then on, just to find him, so, both of his headaches were resolved when Brunhild came to the door. He knew she'd show up. Chapter 42. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So, how does Brunhilde's arrival help him exactly? He intends to use her to penetrate the Akasha system of the main world, a way to disguise the Qin dynasty within it, and how does he get access to the Akasha system? By using the Akasha system within his own parallel world to break in, that's where Brunhilde comes in. She acts like a network cable, connecting the normally isolated Akasha system to the outside world. If that's true, why let her leave now? Could the main Akasha system have been secretly compromised through her without her knowledge? No, that can't be. To operate the Akasha system of this smaller world, he needs to be recognized as the first emperor. As Xiangyu, he lacks the authority, and the first emperor persona is no longer available. His time with that identity has passed. There's a fixed point when the first emperor, as recorded in history, ceases to exist. At that point, the role-playing ends, and he can no longer act as the first emperor. Now, as Xiangyu, his power lies in marking Brunhilde, a mark that allows the world to recognize her. With this mark, when Brunhilde enters Xianyang City in the main world, the world tree won't immediately identify her as a harmful virus and attack her, turning her into fertilizer. To avoid exposing the anomalies of the Qin dynasty, the world tree, also present in the main world, will only detect the divine presence within the Qin state's boundaries before the unification of the six kingdoms. If the entire Qin dynasty territory were reached, it would attack immediately. Without the mark, the world tree might kill her before he could react. Here's the question. Brunhilde began using the Akashic system in 221 BC. Why the sudden jump to the so-called Wujiang suicide period? Someone's clearly tampered with the Akasha system. A trigger program was set up, waiting for Brunhilde to arrive in 221 BC, activating the program and teleporting her to 202 BC. Who set up this program? Did one of the four supreme demon gods do it? Nope, he manipulated the Akashic system and implanted the trigger himself. Did he invade from the future? Not exactly. The invasion occurred in 221 BC, when Brunhilde first went there. It's a hidden program left behind when Brunhilde was used as a network cable for the initial invasion. In reality, for him at this moment, it's already happened. He successfully disguised the Qin dynasty from 259 BC to 210 BC. After the disguise and shielding, anyone accessing Xianyang through the Akasha records wouldn't detect the anomaly, and his world tree wouldn't suddenly attack it, turning it into fertilizer. So, there's no need to intercept Brunhilde now, right? He could just let that time pass. Absolutely not. There's a time paradox involved. Imagine going back in time and killing your grandfather before he has kids. With him dead, your father wouldn't exist, and neither would you. If you don't exist, you couldn't go back in time to kill your grandfather. Similarly, if he didn't intercept Brunhilde in this era, letting her jump normally, and she ended up as world tree fertilizer, his Akasha system invasion, with all the disguises and blocking, would never have happened. Now, Bai-Yu is seeing something appear. Entering next roll. Countdown, 5. This roll is ending. He wonders if his consciousness can connect to the artificial human he'll create after jumping to the next roll. There are two bodies in total, the current Xiangyu, and a more advanced mechanical holy body of the first emperor. But that one isn't fully repaired yet. He wants to ask the system about this. He hopes this brain-dead system can answer. It's feasible. The answer wasn't a simple feasible, but a bunch of technical jargon, from which he deduced that it was feasible. If it works, in his next roll, he can use two bodies, the one he's playing and the Xiangyu artificial human, he can construct and upgrade the first emperor's body through the Xiangyu body and clean house internally. Why purge it? Because after entering the next role, there'll be a period of disconnect. During that time, some people in the Qin Empire of his parallel world will realize he's been inactive for too long. They'll start to suspect something, challenge his authority, and test him. If they see no response, they'll try to usurp the Qin Empire. When he comes back online, the reactivated Kuiji Type 0 will unleash hell on those people. He needs to deal with the growing issues, stabilize the Qin Empire, and steer it towards his desired course, accelerating industrial change. He's not worried about the other country, because they have a contract with the Demon King Burial. As long as the contract isn't broken, the demons will supervise them, preventing the entire country from collapsing. The contract isn't permanent, however. Burial would rather die than sign a perpetual contract, which lasts only until the modern millennium. During this period, Burial can't violate the contract, so the next character will span hundreds of years. As for the previous role, it was a role before the first emperor, not King Solomon. This role fell between the first emperor and Solomon. That character was also an imperial figure, active from 356 BC to 323 BC. Here, Brunhilde finally reaches the Qin dynasty era. Chapter 43. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She didn't know what the Overlord had done, only that her vision blurred for a moment and the world around her twisted. It was like watching a movie reel playing in reverse, too fast to follow. Faces flashed by, gone before she could register them. It felt both like forever and a blink of an eye. Then, just like that, the scene vanished like a mirage. One moment she was on the banks of the Wujiang River. The next she was standing on a wide avenue, her pupils dilated. Not far away, towering city walls and fortified gates loomed over a vast square. Ancient soldiers, weapons in hand, stood guard and patrolled. Through the open gates, she could see a sprawling complex, unlike anything she'd ever seen, a majestic palace fit for an emperor. Brunhilde recognized it instantly. Xianyang Palace, she breathed, the palace of the first emperor, where he ruled. But figuring out where she'd landed in time wasn't the priority. Something else was far more urgent. To keep her from being captured by Xiangyu, her sweet sister Randy Grace had volunteered to stay behind, becoming his possession. The thought made Brunhilde's blood run cold. Randy Grace. She called out, fear lacing her voice. Huh. Sis, a response. Brunhilde was stunned. Randy Grace was right there beside her, looking just as bewildered. Was it an illusion? Brunhilde rushed forward and embraced her, feeling the solid reality of her sister's form. I'm not alone. Randy Grace murmured, confused. Hadn't she been supposed to stay? Why was she here too? Brynhilde was just as baffled, but her expression tightened. She felt something, a mark, within her. She remembered seeing Randy Grace get hit with something as they were being transported. Randy Grace, do you feel a mark inside you? Yeah, I do. What was that mark for? Randy Grace felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. Could it be removed? Better not try to remove that mark. It's your Qin identification tag for this era. Without it, you'll be seen as an enemy, and the consequences. The Overlord of Western Chu's voice echoed in their minds. Was he watching them somehow? A real-time connection? No, it was a pre-recorded message, embedded in the mark. As the message registered, both sisters gasped as two golden lights descended from the sky, bathing Xianyang City in their glow. Gods. Eastern gods. Maybe deities from that island nation to the Far East. The next second, the newly arrived gods were attacked. Vines, thick as pythons, erupted from the ground, snaring them before they could react. They aged rapidly, their divine life force draining away. They struggled, but couldn't break free. In an instant, they were sucked into a void and vanished. This is the consequence. The Overlord's message finished. In other words, without that mark, they would have been attacked by those strange vines, sucked into the void. As they were pulled away, the gods glimpsed a colossal tree. Sis, is that? It looks like the World Tree. Though they only saw a glimpse, the Valkyrie sisters were shaken. it was as if they stood before the world tree. They were bewildered by such a strange, ancient tree. Protecting Xianyang. That was beyond human power. Was this protection from the gods of the Eastern immortal world? Brynhilde knew that the Eastern immortal world and the gods of other mythologies generally kept to themselves. Gods from other realms who trespassed were dealt with swiftly and brutally. Now, she'd seen it with her own eyes, which brought her back to one question: why did Xiangyu say he wanted to keep Randy Grace? Maybe he was just messing with them, the bastard. That jerk. Brunhilde spat, unable to contain her anger. Randy Grace understood now and couldn't help but smile. She guessed Xiangyu was just teasing them, not actually intending to do anything. But thinking about him saying he'd make her his poppy, her heart hammered in her chest. They quickly composed themselves, scanning their surroundings. Xianyang City was electric with tension. Normally, the avenue outside the palace would be bustling with vendors setting up their stalls, but today, everything was shut down. That meant the avenue was relatively clear, though crowded with people craning their necks towards Xianyang Palace. Sis, look at the ground. The ground? Randy Grace's eyes widened, urging her sister to look down. Brynhilde studied the stone-paved road. It looked normal enough. But then it hit her. The paving stones were too perfect. It looked like something paved with modern technology, not 2,000 years ago. The stones were almost exactly the same size, as if cut and polished with modern tools. Looking at the walls of Xianyang Palace, she saw the same unnerving precision in their construction. A hush fell over the crowd as a team of black-armored soldiers marched towards the palace gates. Each soldier exuded an aura of deadly purpose as they moved with practiced precision. She caught sight of guards flanking a lavish carriage, and within the carriage sat a figure wearing a magnificent black robe embroidered with gold. The figure radiated an overwhelming presence, making it difficult to look directly at him. There was no doubt. It was the ruler of the Qin dynasty, the first emperor, Yingzheng himself. As if sensing their gaze, the first emperor's eyes locked onto them, his gaze sharp with potent killing intent. In that moment, the sisters felt like rabbits caught in the crosshairs of a predator, frozen and unable to move. Chapter 44. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Brunhilde and Randy Grace both felt a knot of anxiety in their stomachs. Was it just a weird coincidence that the first emperor looked their way? Or had he actually spotted them? Separated by the bead curtain, they couldn't make out his eyes, couldn't be sure if he was looking at them. No, something felt off. He definitely noticed them. More than that, he didn't just notice, but intuitively saw them. Xiangyu, the overlord of Western Chu, could sense their presence. Surely the Emperor of Qin, who made Xiangyu surrender, was an even more terrifying force. He had to have noticed them. Xiangyu had inspired fear, but he also seemed like a bold, brash figure. The first emperor was imposing, but in a different way. It was a calculated, world-ruling kind of power. They felt like rabbits in the sights of a predator, afraid to twitch a muscle lest they be instantly destroyed. Brunhilde felt a weird echo of facing Lord Odin himself, a feeling that triggered her deepest fears. The sheer oppressive weight of it almost forced her to drop to one knee. Randy Grace was experiencing the same thing. Cold sweat beaded on her smooth skin, and her breath hitched, forcing herself to move. Brunhilde grabbed Randy Grace's arm, pulling her to the side. They'd been standing in the middle of the road. The black-armored soldiers seemed oblivious, passing right through them, but the first emperor, radiating a terrifying aura, had seen them. To stand there like that, so brazenly in the way, felt like a profound disrespect. They shuffled to the edge of the road, watching as the dragon chariot rumbled closer. The dragon chariot was a carriage pulled by 6 horses, decked out in gold, silver, and jade, the sides emblazoned with dragons and phoenixes. It screamed wealth and imperial status. The first emperor, a legend in the history of the East, was sitting inside. As the chariot passed, the first emperor didn't glance at them again. He'd only looked at them for a few seconds before averting his gaze. Had he not registered them at all? Had they imagined the whole thing? No, he'd seen them. He just didn't see them as important. Okay, if they were ordinary people, fine. But they were Valkyries, observing this era from beyond time. That had to warrant more attention. Either he really hadn't noticed, which seemed impossible, or he was supremely confident and didn't consider them a threat. That seemed more likely. Another possibility was that the first emperor was self-assured. He was secure that they couldn't cause any trouble. They were simply not on his level, not in status, not in power. Therefore, the first emperor did not consider them a threat at all. His only real opponents were the generals and emperors from the vanquished 6 kingdoms. Scratch that, his only true opponent was God. Brunhilde's pupils shrank. Something felt off about the black-armored troops surrounding the first emperor. Even their faces were covered. Their footsteps seemed too heavy. Sure, it could be the weight of their armor, but it felt like something more, like they were carrying their own weight, plus more. It felt like they weren't even human. Not human. Brunhilde thought back to Xiang Yu and felt a chill. Were they automatons? How was that possible in this era? It was all so bizarre. Was this fairy from the Eastern world meddling in human affairs on this scale? The 2 sisters followed the procession as most of the citizens of Xianyang moved toward the city gate. Reaching the gate and looking out over the vast field, both sisters were stunned. The open space was packed with a huge, imposing army, the most powerful force in the Qin dynasty. This army, stained with the blood of countless battles, radiated a bone-chilling aura that cut through time itself. Was this an expedition? No, that wasn't right. At this point, the first emperor hadn't unified the nation yet. There was nothing to invade. Her timing had been right, chosen specifically to coincide with the establishment of the imperial system. The Akashic system confirmed the timeline, so, this was just a military parade to celebrate the occasion. Not only the residents of Xianyang were watching, but also merchants from across the land. Brunhilde spotted a few traders from distant countries not under the emperor's rule. Sis, that what had Randy Gray seen? Yeah. Brunhilde nodded. She had also noticed the people with hidden agendas mixed in the crowd. These were probably sent by disgruntled nobles from the 6 conquered kingdoms. Look at how tense they were, how jumpy. They were desperate not to be discovered and seemed to be planning something big. Some had something hidden in their sleeves. Suddenly, as the crowd jostled, someone bumped into him, revealing the glint of a sharp blade at the edge of his sleeve. The man quickly pulled his sleeve down, visibly relieved when he realized no one had noticed. Were they planning to assassinate the first emperor? That would be a fool's errand. Didn't they see the army all around? Besides, there were those black-armored soldiers, possibly artificial humans. They were moths flying toward a flame, so, maybe assassination wasn't the main goal. It was likely part of the plan. If they had a chance, they would kill the first emperor. But their primary objective was to disrupt today's ceremony. How? By causing panic. How to create panic? Simple, kill innocent bystanders. Once the panic spread, the crowd would descend into chaos. The emperor's soldiers would be unable to intervene, and the assassins would be free. They wanted to humiliate the first emperor in front of the world. It was revenge served cold, courtesy of the nobles of the 6 kingdoms. Chapter 45. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He surveyed the dense crowd, each figure radiating a disturbing chill. These were the tyrant Zheng's killing machines. Since Zheng had started his conquest of the 6 kingdoms, these men had ruthlessly taken countless lives. Looking at these malicious figures disguised as emotionless soldiers, some observers swallowed hard. If a fight broke out, could anyone really escape unharmed? The thought flickered. If there was an uprising or assassination attempt, these ruthless legions might ignore the bystanders and attack anyone. Better to kill 1,000 innocent people than let one guilty one go. The more he considered it, the more he believed that the tyrant might issue such an order. Was this the right thing to do? To involve innocent people in bloodshed? Yes, it is, he decided. Most of the people here were from Qin, not the conquered kingdoms. Their deaths had nothing to do with him. Besides, where did Qin's soldiers come from? Recruits from Qin, of course, and who paid for the war? The people of Qin. Without their resources, Qin's soldiers never could have conquered the 6 nations. Therefore, everyone in Qin, from the king down to the commoners, were complicit in the destruction of the 6 kingdoms. If the upcoming revolt spilled blood, the people in the crowd got what they deserved. With that thought, some who were wavering regained their resolve. Wait. That he spotted a few faces that didn't look like Qin natives. People from the 6 kingdoms. Could they share his ambition, waiting to strike the tyrant in cooperation? A closer look suggested otherwise. They looked like average citizens. If there was unrest, these uninvolved people would be caught in the crossfire. The ruthless Qin regime would slaughter anyone not originally from Qin. Was it right to implicate innocents like this? Yes, they deserved to die. Anyone who cared about the people of the Six Kingdoms, anyone who still felt the sting of their nation's defeat, should be joining the cause. Instead, they were here, doing business, making a living, shedding their past identities, and choosing to live under Qin rule, traitors and cowards. They deserved to die. His gaze landed on another figure, a man in a luxurious black robe. He had just stepped out of his carriage and was heading toward the reviewing stand. The damned tyrant who destroyed the Six Kingdoms, shattered countless families, and plunged countless people into hell. If not for this tyrant's wars, he wouldn't have been separated from his wife and forced to join the army. When he returned home, it was a wasteland. The house they shared was a charred ruin. Worst of all, he found small, burned bodies in the rubble. His wife and son, and the architect of this horror was the tyrant himself. Overwhelmed by rage and hatred, he wanted to charge forward and kill the man. Then, his counselor's words echoed in his mind, calming him down. From this distance, a rush would be useless. He wouldn't get close, and it would ruin the plan. Patience. The time hasn't come yet. Suddenly, he stiffened. Everyone around him was staring. Exposed. But their gazes passed over him, returning to the tyrant. He relaxed slightly. Maybe the anger he felt toward the tyrant had triggered some telltale emotion. Still, he felt a deep sense of unease. Something about the other spectators felt off, wrong. Could they all be soldiers in disguise? The thought sent a jolt of fear through him. It wasn't impossible. If a riot started, these civilians could turn on them. He had to warn his comrades, but there were so many operatives, spread over a wide area. He couldn't reach them all, only the closest ones, and he didn't know who they were. They were scattered to avoid a single betrayal leading to a mass arrest. His only contacts were people from Yen. He didn't know anyone from the other conquered kingdoms. He could only hope the others were thinking the same thing, carefully watching the people around them, trying to determine if they were really civilians or soldiers in disguise. His eyes returned to the tyrant. Standing on the podium, the tyrant raised a hand, and silence fell. The unified silence of the army was expected, but the coordinated silence of the crowd was terrifying. The cruel king scanned the crowd. When his gaze swept toward him, the assassin felt an unprecedented sense of oppression. It was as if he were facing the might of God, freezing him in place, stopping his breath, and silencing his heart. As the tyrant's eyes passed over him, every nerve screamed. He almost collapsed, weak and shaking. His clothes were instantly soaked in cold sweat. Stay calm. Breathe normally. Don't act strangely. Don't draw attention. He glanced around again. No one seemed to notice him, which, logically, should be a relief. Instead, he felt a strong sense of foreboding. Before, he thought of himself as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, it felt like a sheep among wolves. Could it be that most of these civilians were actually soldiers? But even soldiers wouldn't create this feeling. Then it hit him. This was the nightmare he used to have. He was surrounded by the living dead. That was the cold feeling he was getting from the people around him. Was he trapped among the living dead? Chapter 46. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What exactly are the living dead? Well, just like the name suggests, they're like living dead people. Think zombie-type monsters. Rumors about them have been around forever. Supposedly, the tyrant Zheng has an army of them. These things don't feel pain, and they have zero emotions. As long as you don't completely dismember them, they'll keep fighting. Piercing their heart or even chopping off their heads doesn't stop these people. When that tyrant conquered the Six Kingdoms, he slaughtered tons of people, wiping out entire cities. Usually, a city like that would be overflowing with corpses, right? But these cities were completely deserted. So, the rumor went that he used the corpses of the slain to create his living dead army. That's why the assassin doesn't buy into the exaggerated tales about the living dead legion, but he does believe that monsters like the living dead exist, because he's run into one before. This thing had fatal wounds all over its body, its head almost split in two, but it kept moving, and get this, no blood. That's what was so terrifying. He freaked out so bad that he abandoned his buddies and ran for his life. Now, though, he's getting a feeling that the civilians around him aren't really alive. He's getting a similar vibe to that living dead monster he saw before. Sis, don't you think these civilians, Randy Grace, a Valkyrie and one of the historical observers, is also picking up on something weird? It's the silence from these ordinary people. They all stop making noise at the same time. That's what's strange. I mean, some people couldn't even see Emperor Shi Huang's gesture to be quiet because of the crowd. Even if they notice the people in front of them going silent, it's impossible for them all to go quiet at once. Silence like that should start near the first emperor and then spread outwards. People in the back who couldn't see him would react based on the reactions of those in front. It wouldn't be instantaneous. But this silence, it's like everyone's being. Like they're being manipulated, right? Brunhilde finished her sister's thought. To get that kind of synchronization, you'd need trained soldiers, and even then, with so many people, it'd be really bizarre. So, Randy Grace and her sister suspect that the first emperor has some kind of trick to control everyone. Is that even possible? Well, it's not impossible. Remember when we were searching for historical figures' souls, and we couldn't find a bunch of them? And didn't we see Xiang Yu transfer his soul out of his original body? Maybe those souls are gone, leaving behind bodies that the first emperor's controlling with magic. In other words, during this entire military parade, most of the people are probably puppets under the first emperor's control, and anyone planning to cause trouble probably got exposed a long time ago. The moment they act, they'll get attacked by the living dead. But would the first emperor really do something so messed up? Rip the souls out of countless civilians and turn them into his puppets? And the gods in the east don't have a clue about this? Did they even notice? Maybe discovering the first emperor's evil magic is what led to the collapse of his powerful dynasty after only 10 years. They say the first emperor did a lot of things to pursue immortality. So, is this soul extraction some kind of process for him to achieve it? Experimenting with human soul transfer so he can put his soul into a stronger body? And that mechanical body Xiang you saw earlier was probably based on this technology. So, how did such advanced technology suddenly pop up in this era? Suddenly, the war drums started, and the fighting spirit in the sound jolted Brunhilde out of her thoughts. The emperor was starting to review his undefeated army. These soldiers, veterans of countless battles, were arranging their troops with perfect rhythm. From their marching, weapon handling, and sharp eyes, Brunhilde felt that they were the strongest army in the world. Period. They had unwavering hearts that would dare to attack the gods themselves if their king commanded it, and they weren't living dead, they were real, living people. As the war drums got louder, the army's morale got more intense. It could pierce the sky and alarm the gods. The drums beat faster and faster, and the sound seemed to have magic, piercing through time and space, disturbing Brunhilde's heartbeat and giving her a slight feeling of palpitations, as the drums stopped. How can I say that I have no clothes? Be in the same robe as your son. The king raised his army, repaired my sword and spear, and shared the same enemy with me. Not just the soldiers, but the king, ministers, and even the people were singing, huh? Brunhilde noticed that the assassins from the 6 nations, mixed in with the crowd, were finally making their move. A short blade hidden in a sleeve quietly revealed its sharp edge, and then the assassin slashed it across the neck of a civilian in front of him. The skin tore open, and the trachea was almost completely severed. It was a fatal injury, no question. The assassin didn't bother to see what happened after. He was already moving on to the next target. The tip of the blade stabbed into the chest of another civilian, right over the heart, but then he got confused, because it was harder to push through than he expected. Did he hit a rib? He pushed harder, plunging the blade in, then ripped it out. Blood should have spurted out, right? But there was no blood. When he pulled the blade out, the edge snagged. He tore the clothes open, exposing the chest underneath, and the puncture wound. The wound left the assassin in shock. There really wasn't any blood, and he saw something horrifying through the opening. There was no flesh and blood inside, and the other guy didn't even notice him. He just kept singing the war song. Realizing something, he turned to look at the first guy, the one whose throat he'd cut. He was still standing, and there was a weird sound coming from his throat. The assassin's hair stood on end. It wasn't just him. All the assassins were frozen in place. Chapter 47. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everyone attacking the first emperor froze. The initial chaos they caused among ordinary people quickly turned to terror as something wasn't right. "Sis, is this some kind of..." Randy Grace's voice trembled, even she was rattled by the sight before them. The wounds on the people who'd been attacked weren't bleeding. That's because they weren't flesh and blood. Through the gashes, you could see mechanical parts. Almost none of these people were human. Like Xiangyu, their souls had been transferred into mechanical bodies. Now, they seemed immune to pain, ignoring everything. It was a chilling sight, and it made Randy Grace's blood boil. She couldn't believe so many people, practically the whole city, would willingly give up their bodies to become mechanical creations. They felt no pain, but had they lost other emotions, too? Were they being manipulated? Maybe they'd been brainwashed, stripped of their humanity. They were nothing more than machine puppets, devoid of any self, even worse than Xiangyu. At least he looked human, and seemed to retain his emotions. Looking closer, some people hadn't joined the attack. They still seemed human. Some had been scared witless when those around them suddenly turned violent. Then they were even more terrified by what happened to the people who were supposed to be injured or killed. Others, even if they hadn't seen violence, noticed something strange about the people around them. What was going on with them? These people must have come from out of town, drawn by the military parade. They were real, flesh and blood people, but having seen this secret, they were likely doomed to the same fate. Their souls would be forcibly extracted, transferred into machines, imprisoned, and become puppets controlled by the first emperor. This was how he created an invincible army. How could human soldiers defeat emotionless, pain-immune machines? "Hold your horses, Randy Grace," her sister said, seemingly reading her mind, knowing the source of her anger. "Think carefully. Has anything seemed off since the parade started? Could it be that things weren't as they seemed?" Randy Grace replayed the moment the first emperor stepped onto the stage. Something was strange. A slight visual flicker, like interference, like a jump in the picture, so brief you'd miss it if you weren't paying close attention. But what was the deal with that? Randy Grace tried to pinpoint the problem. Then she saw it. Imagine someone standing in front of you, 5 feet 9 inches, then, in the next frame, they're 5 feet 11 inches. If they were wearing the same clothes, you might not notice, but even with the same style of clothes, you could see the difference in the wrinkles, not the wrinkles caused by movement, but differences in how the clothes were worn. A sleeve rolled up in one frame, unrolled in the next, and the clothes looked older in one frame, newer in the next. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was widespread. Wait. She spotted another anomaly. One of the attackers was standing in front of someone wearing the same outfit, with the same face. That was weird, right? Why would anyone dress like an attacker? And there was another common thread. The heights of the people in the first frame were somewhat inconsistent, some taller, some shorter. In the next frame, their heights were uniform. Kids wouldn't suddenly become adults, but even kids of the same age had the same specs, like dolls from a modern assembly line, just with different faces. This was getting weirder and weirder, but during that split-second flicker, some people hadn't changed at all, the attackers and the out-of-towners. "Sis, what the heck is going on?" Despite her observations, Randy Grace couldn't figure it out. She needed her sister's insight. From the slight smile playing on her lips, she guessed her sister understood. "You think the first emperor is forcing people to abandon their bodies and imprisoning their souls in machines?" "Well, isn't that what's happening?" Her sister's tone suggested otherwise. Randy Grace hoped it wasn't true. The thought of someone's soul being ripped from their body and bound to a machine was too cruel. "No," Brunhilde said, shaking her head. She saw it all more clearly. During that flicker, the world had been instantly replaced. Chapter 48. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just like before with Xiangyu, there was this weird shift. It's like one day we were in the BC era, and the next we're in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. She had a hunch about what caused it. She was pulled into an alternate space, identical to the real one. In other words, that fluctuation moved the would-be troublemakers and ceremony onlookers to a parallel reality, a Qin dynasty with way more advanced tech. Meanwhile, the first emperor had set up mechanical actors and a matching stage so the switch wouldn't be immediately obvious. So, how did he pinpoint who was a problem? Someone not from Xianying. Maybe the original operative had made a prearranged signal, but Brunhilde had another, more likely theory. She'd picked it up from her war song. Genuine well-wishers weren't moved, but anyone who didn't sing or wasn't sincere got flagged and sent to the alternate dimension. She had no idea how he determined that, though. Why did the first emperor even do this? Was he planning to quietly eliminate these people to protect the loyal citizens of Great Qin? There had to be more to it than that. He had to be sorting people. After all, some were just travelers from afar. Would he really just kill them before they even felt any loyalty to the Qin? That seemed too harsh. This was probably a deeper screening, a way to smoke out hidden attackers, wait for them to make a move, and catch them red-handed. That had to be the real reason. Brunhilde was stunned by his incredible abilities and methods. First, how did he even have a parallel space? And how did he make it almost identical to the real world? Did he do that to make the transfer seamless? And this parallel space wasn't the same as a parallel world. In Brunhilde's mind, it was more like a small, extra-dimensional world overlaid on reality. Each pantheon had its own such space, but these spaces needed something special to exist. Something beyond human reach. Sis. Lanty Grace's shocked voice snapped her back to attention. Randy Grace wasn't looking at the first emperor, but had turned to stare at Xianyang City behind them. Her face was a mask of disbelief. What was she seeing? Brynhilde turned to look, her eyes following the panicked assassins who were running towards Xianyang City. The army blocked the way ahead, so the city was their only option. As they ran through the city gates, they froze, their faces etched with horror. They stared into Xianyang, like it was hell itself. Brunhilde looked too, trying to see what terrified them so much, and what she saw was. So it's true, that the city looked fundamentally different than it should in 200 BC. It felt like a completely foreign place. No, maybe otherworldly was more accurate. It still had traces of the ancient style, but the differences were enough to scare the intruders, especially, she imagined, around Xianyang Palace. The structures there were impossibly huge. They looked like they were built into the trunk of a giant tree. In fact, it was the trunk of a tree, the world tree. Of course, this alien space needed the world tree to exist. This one was much smaller than the world tree Brunhilde knew. So, where did the first emperor get it? Wait, something was off. Was that why the Akasha system was blocked? In these spaces tied to reality, the world trees were branches of the main world tree. They couldn't sever the connection. To refuse was to disconnect. To commit suicide, the tree would wither, and the space would collapse, but this world tree didn't seem to be dying. Could it be truly independent, able to survive on its own? Unless this world tree was equal to the one outside, making this space its own complete universe, but that was impossible. How could it be? Absolutely not. Solomon had created a similar space before. Did that space have a world tree, too? Did King Solomon have his own little world like the first emperor? There was a difference, though. His alien space had borrowed from the Hell Demon King's space. Sis, that's the world tree, right? Lanty Grace finally came to her senses, sounding dazed. Gods were the only ones with space supported by the world tree. It was their base of operations, and this was a world for humans. Plus, the technology was far beyond anything in the outside world. Could the first emperor have found alien supercivilization tech somewhere in the universe? It was impossible. The gods knew the universe. They would have noticed. Yeah. Brunhilde nodded, confused about something else. Hadn't the Eastern gods noticed the first emperor's activities? Come to think of it, the Eastern gods had made a big intervention in the human world more than 3,000 years ago. Other gods got involved, and it turned into a huge fight that made the other gods back off and stay out of this area of the human world, and they hadn't attended the millennial meeting since, but at this most recent meeting, several new gods from the Eastern world participated as representatives. They also agreed without hesitation to the proposal to exterminate humanity. Brunhilde froze, cold sweat trickling down her face, a gaze locked onto her, a crushing, judgmental gaze. P.S. Asking for flowers tickets. Chapter 49. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That intense gaze hung in the air, suffocating Brunhilde. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Her body seemed to solidify, frozen in place by the invisible pressure. It was as if the force was penetrating her skin, reaching her blood vessels and organs, clotting her blood and stopping her heart. Who possessed such a powerful gaze? No need to guess. Who else could it be but the master of the Qin Empire, the first emperor, Yingzheng? Had the first emperor sensed the Valkyrie sisters across time and space? It wasn't just sensing, he saw them. He could practically reach out and touch them. They had been pulled into this isolated space, just like when they encountered Xiangyu. Phew, Brunhilde finally exhaled, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding forever. The oppressive gaze that had paralyzed her had moved away. Randy Grace, who had been petrified beside her, nearly collapsed. In fact, Randy's legs were giving out. She only stopped herself from falling because she felt another stare, stiffening her again, but it wasn't the first emperor. He had dismissed them with a glance, boarded his chariot, and was heading back to Xianying City. So, if it wasn't the first emperor, what was causing her panic and cold sweats? Thousands of eyes were on her. The emotionless, puppet-like automatons were all staring. The sheer number of eyes was overwhelming. Fortunately, they didn't maintain their stare for long. The automatons shed their disguises, revealing themselves as black armored soldiers. They marched in perfect formation, like robots, following the first emperor back to the city. Randy Grace tensed again as a small group of cavalry approached, heading straight for them. "Sister," she said, her voice laced with anxiety. "Don't worry. If they wanted to hurt us, they would have already done it." Anyone who had tried to approach Xianying City had been swiftly dealt with by the black-armored soldiers. Of course, not everyone was killed. Some were just innocent spectators who had come from afar for the ceremony. These people had simply followed the soldiers' instructions. These approaching soldiers were clearly alive. You could see it in the human expressions on their faces. Unlike the masked, mechanical black-armored soldiers, the soldiers didn't question them or say a word, simply inviting them into a carriage that had also been brought along. Inside the carriage, they followed the larger group into the city. Through the window, they got a better look at the magnificent city. It was vastly different from the real-world Xianying City. Mostly in size, this Xianying City was comparable to the size of a modern metropolis 20 times over. They expected it to be cold here, seeing as how it was filled with cold puppet machines. But in reality, it was full of life and vitality, and the people living here had it much better than those outside Xianying City. It was like a city at the dawn of the first industrial revolution, except the city planning was way better than back then. The closer they got to the city center, the more shocked the sisters became. The massive metal structure, seemingly built on the world tree, was colossal. If it fell, it would likely level the Xianying City of the real world. What was this thing used for? "Sister, where are they taking us?" Randy Grace asked, her voice uneasy. She had lost contact with the Akasha system again, meaning they couldn't escape this space, couldn't go back. "I don't know. We'll find out when we meet the Emperor." Everything depended on meeting the first Emperor. She hadn't expected the first Emperor to be so abnormal. But the more abnormal he was, the more excited Brunhilde became. Everything she had seen proved that the first Emperor possessed extraordinary abilities. If he could become one of the 13 representatives of mankind, then humanity's chances in the twilight of the gods battle would increase by 10%. But would he be willing to fight on behalf of humans? After all, this emperor had his own world. Fighting on behalf of humans would expose his home. Would the gods allow humans to control a place like this? Was he willing to risk it? Would they take such a risk? Brunhilde suddenly felt nervous. If the emperor wasn't willing to take the risk, their situation would be difficult. They might not be killed. If that were the plan, it would have happened already. But they might be locked up in this world, unable to return. That would be a serious problem. After all, she was the one who had provoked the gods into initiating the Twilight of the Gods battle, and if she, the initiator, disappeared, the duel couldn't proceed. Then the humans in the outside world would be destroyed by the impatient gods. "Sister," Randy Grace noticed her sister breaking out in a cold sweat, her fists clenched. She was clearly worried about something. "It's okay." Brunhilde immediately regained her composure, not wanting to worry her sister. In a blink of an eye, the two sisters were standing in front of a majestic building. They were about to ascend this gigantic Gilgamesh-like structure. They were about to climb stairs higher than the Sheena Pyramid Temple, enter the palace hall, and meet the first emperor on his throne. Chapter 50. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Valkyrie sisters weren't summoned right away. they continued waiting outside the palace for the emperor's meetings to conclude. Half a day passed, and they still hadn't been called. Was this a deliberate snub? Maybe it looked that way to others, but Randy Grace didn't think so. The emperor wasn't making an exception by dismissing officials or postponing the day's business just because of them. No matter who they were, they had to follow the rules of the Qin Empire and would be called when their turn came. From where she stood, Randy Grace could see a constant flow of people entering and leaving, all seeming busy and carrying out orders. Sis, if the Qin Empire were still around 2,000 years from now, what would it be like? Randy Grace asked. Things had already come this far. What would the future hold? I have no idea. Brynhilde shook her head, also curious about 2 millennia of progress. If the Qin Empire had remained intact, where would it have gone? But Brynhilde didn't have time to dwell on that now. She was growing increasingly anxious. She worried the emperor was deliberately stalling, which would create a major problem. Ragnarok was fast approaching, and it couldn't happen without her. The gods would be looking for her, and some would laugh, accusing her of running scared. But the ridicule wasn't the issue. Ragnarok simply couldn't proceed without her. Would the gods then destroy humanity? It was a mistake. She hadn't anticipated being pulled into alternate dimensions. Had she known, she would have pinpointed the first person she needed and summoned him immediately. That way, even if she wasn't there, he could hold things down for a while. Wait, there was movement. Lots of footsteps. Soon, officials appeared, seemingly having concluded their meeting. Finally, their presence was acknowledged. As they entered the grand hall and saw the black-robed figure at the far end, they both stiffened. While the gaze directed at them lacked the crushing pressure from before, it still made them uneasy. Brunhilde felt utterly exposed. It wasn't a physical thing, but more like being naked, completely vulnerable. It was as if everything, flesh, blood, bone, thoughts, emotions, values, habits, and temperament, every element that made up Brunhilde, was being meticulously analyzed by those all-seeing eyes. The king seemed to see her true self, without reservation. The feeling of being dissected and scrutinized made her fearful. Composing herself, Brunhilde briefly explained their origins and purpose to the emperor. He didn't seem surprised, but regarded them calmly. So, you want me to participate? His voice was even, revealing nothing. We hope your majesty, as a representative of humanity, will take part in this duel to determine humanity's fate. Brunhilde wanted to add that the people of Qin in the outside world could also be considered subjects of the emperor. Even if the great Qin had crumbled, shouldn't they resist the gods' arbitrary determination of their future? She considered provoking the emperor, stirring him up to agree to the war of the gods in a similar way, but she stopped herself. This emperor wasn't easily manipulated, and she sensed it would be a mistake. It was better to make a sincere request. I'm curious about something. He didn't accept or refuse, but posed this. What was he curious about? Please, your majesty. Why do you believe humans can fight gods? Even the most powerful human is no match for a god. True, ordinary humans can never defeat gods. But your majesty is hardly ordinary, is he? Ha ha ha. The emperor chuckled. So, you think I can triumph over a god? What makes you so sure? If you are, wouldn't the gods be aware of it? Brunhilde understood the implications. Surely, if she knew of historical figures capable of killing gods, the gods would as well, and wouldn't allow her to choose them. Either the gods were unaware of such humans, or Brunhilde had some other method to make humans kill gods, or the gods simply didn't care, because they didn't believe these people could win. The emperor wanted to understand the former, and know what specific methods Brunhilde had for enabling ordinary humans to kill gods. Normal humans can't hurt a god without a divine weapon. When she first started looking for people to represent humanity, Brunhilde didn't expect to find anomalies like the King of Heroes, King Solomon, or the first emperor. Therefore, she sought relatively powerful figures in human history. Only by giving them artifacts could they contend with gods. So, you intend for humans to fight gods with artifacts? I suspect that won't be enough. It's not. Simply giving humans artifacts wasn't enough. First, the artifacts had to be highly adaptable. Humans and artifacts needed to be completely integrated, mastered perfectly, to stand a chance, but finding such an adaptable artifact that could be easily mastered was difficult. Therefore, Brynhild had a way to unite humans and gods, granting humans the power to fight gods, and this method, relying solely on her Valkyrie sisters, wouldn't suffice. She needed the help of a god, which allowed her to see that humanity might win, however unlikely, so, after some hesitation, she revealed the method. I see. The Valkyries are truly giving their all for humanity to win. As the Emperor said this, his gaze made Brunhilde uneasy. It's not impossible for me to participate. Just satisfy one condition.